Next up, guys, we got Drakkar Klose and Brandon Jenkins. And, the one thing about Drakkar Klose that I've always loved is just that wrestling base and his ability to push pace and, keep it exciting. He doesn't look like a guy that's gifted or excels in any specific area like an Adesanya type striker, but he really is just a well-versed mixed martial artist. Now, a couple knocks on him. He just jumps from gym to gym quite a bit. But he recently has linked back up with MMA Lab, and we're glad to see that relationship's going really well. I mean, he mentioned that he's starting to feel more at home again and all that kind of fun stuff. So that's the kind of stuff you want to hear from a fighter that's kind of struggling to find his place gym-wise. And we coming off of that Jeremy Stevens little injury there as well. It's just been a lot for Drakkar, and I think he's spending time with family and getting things, mentally right before just hopping back in there. And I think he's got a pretty favorable matchup here. And the reason I say that is Brandon Jenkins, another Syndicate MMA boy. And we saw him come in on short notice against a guy like Rong Zhu. I think he came in for Dakota Bush. And the big thing for that fight is, he got his name on the PFL. Jacob Kilburn absolutely destroyed him with that switch flying knee. And everything kind of happened for him after that. But you look at the style, you look at what Zhu Rong was able to do early in that fight, right? It's not like Zhu was just pushing the pace and trying to find takedowns and getting hit really hard and all those things. In fact, there were moments in that fight where Zhu Rong was able to avoid some pretty crazy spinning attacks and just lay a very clean counter hook that just, it's things like that make me always question some of the fancier stuff because fundamentals in sports are just such a big thing. And once you master those, you can start to explore other things. And I think that was a great example of a fighter who's only 21 years old, the youngest on the UFC roster, having a pretty good idea of the smarter way to play that. And, you look at that entire fight and how it played out. I mean, by the end of the fight, he was kind of having his way with him on the ground, getting those takedowns, looking for some good ground and pound. And I mean, some of those punches towards the end were basically sending Brandon across the octagon a little bit, and that's where the referee called the fight. And that's where, in looking at this fight, it's really hard to find those paths to victory for Jenkins because, he really does have to find that finish. He's probably going to have to find a finish on the feet as well. And, Drakkar Klose's last big L was that Beneil Dariush knockout. So we know that that's a possibility. But in hindsight, are you telling yourself that Beneil Dariush and Brandon Jenkins are comparable as strikers? I mean, that's kind of the real question there. And with Jenkins, the big thing that I noticed in his fights is he's technically sound, but the athleticism and speed is certainly missing a bit. And I think that's where Drakkar is going to be on a completely different level. I think athletically, this is a terrible fight for Brandon Jenkins because Drakkar's going to be bigger, he's going to be strong, and he's going to be able to get those takedowns that allow him to get it to the ground and start to find not only submissions but ground and pound opportunities and even, just opportune areas where he's able to get into maybe a half guard and ground and pound a bit harder, maybe sneak into a side control and mount, just those areas where it starts to get very dominant for a ground fighter on top. And that's where I really like to see this. You think about props and stuff like that for this fight. I mean, Jenkins by KO, if you're feeling that vibe where maybe Klose has not learned his lesson since that Dariush fight, but Drakkar on points is something that you can also consider. He hasn't finished anyone since 2015, and honestly, man, those Syndicate boys can take a serious beating. And so in that sense, I think there's some value there for Klose as a points winner, I guess, by decision, if you will. I don't know why I complicated that there. And in terms of guessing a line here, I like Drakkar Klose as a minus 250. I just think that there's so many different ways for him to try and execute a positive game plan, whereas with Jenkins, it very much seems like a look for that puncher's chance. And unless we see Drakkar do his best Mickey Gall impression and kind of throw responsibility to the wind, I think he's going to do enough to get a decision victory here. And, there's a possibility that he does even, get that submission win on the ground. All that stuff is very live, I would say. But all in all, I think Drakkar as a minus 250 makes sense. Maybe a parlay piece at that price. But let's first make sure that is the price that we're going to get him at. But outside of that, I just think, from that Zhu Rong fight, despite it being on short notice, it's just there is a lot to be desired for Brandon Jenkins this early in his UFC career. And I think a fight like Drakkar Klose might be a little too high up the ladder right now to kind of, sell that fight for him as a big opportunity. So let's take a look at the lines. I do believe he Wow. Wow. Okay. So Drakkar opens as a minus 360 favorite. And Brandon comes in at a plus 270. Already, I would tell myself that that's a very difficult fight to touch. But then you're seeing Pinnacle, man. If there was a book to avoid or just compare your lines to, it's Pinnacle. Pinnacle is offering a minus 590 line for Drakkar. So if you're a dog better, Pinnacle is where to be from what I can see. And I talked about that with the Chris Barnett and Martin Budai fight, I think. So right now, Jenkins, a massive underdog. Klose, if you're willing to pay that price, by all means. But I think a sprinkle on Klose by decision is where my brain is. But in terms of a winner, it's just very difficult to not pick Klose at this point in time. So we'll keep the train rolling. We'll wait for the Waynes as we always do and see how they look there and cross our fingers that Drakkar Klose does not get injured at that point. Keep it locked to SookyMMA. Let's move on.